So thank you for having me today. We will jump right in. So a major issue at the forefront of the recent provincial election was affordability. We all know too well that families are paying more out of pocket for basic necessities. We've seen rents skyrocket. They have risen an average of 14.7% across Canada since 2023. And the ability to own a home is getting further out of reach for many people. Food prices have jumped dramatically since the pandemic. Grocery prices have risen by 10% since 2023. Our wages simply are not keeping up, and this means that families are making difficult choices about where to spend their money. But there are some who are more profoundly impacted than others by inflation and downturns in economy. Women make less on the dollar than their male counterparts, and this means when the affordability crisis hit, women, especially women of color, Indigenous women, and women with disabilities, face the greatest financial hardship. And so what I want to talk about today is this gap in income, which is what we refer to as the gender pay gap, which is keeping many women from reaching prosperity. And it's the result of an archaic system that places more value on the work performed by men than the work that women do. And it stems from a system from the 1950s when women were brought into the economy as a secondary household earner. These systems have inherent bias because they were created by men for men. And they chronically undervalue feminized work in workplaces, resulting in systematic gender discrimination. So here's where you can take out your phones. So we're going to do a poll, and the question that we need you to answer is, how many cents do you think women make on the dollar to men? All right, so what did we say? Majority said 76%. The actual answer is 68 cents on the dollar. And this figure is based on annual salaries of men and women when you take into account people who work part-time or are unemployed. So let's take a look at the demographics and how it affects women. So you see the answer was 68 cents, but when you add the intersectionality of women, racialized, Black and Indigenous, women with disabilities, and Arab women, you see how those factors change the number. And so another way that we can understand the gender pay gap is to recognize Equal Pay Day. And what Equal Pay Day is women did not earn what men did in 2023 until April 16th of the following year. So it takes women an extra 3.5 months to earn men's average salary. And so when you consider that, imagine how much that affects the day-to-day life of women. Our purchasing power is different and significantly less, and it affects women's economic freedom. It impacts the ability to save, the ability to qualify for a mortgage, go back to school, or to become an entrepreneur. And for those women who experience intimate partner violence, it impacts their ability to leave dangerous situations. And when you're paid less on the dollar, you're also contributing less to a pension plan if one exists. So that means the inequality that you experience during your working life spills into your retirement. So now it's time to turn our minds to addressing what we can do to address that gap. So because women make less than on the dollar, they don't have the same access to things like higher education, childcare, dental care, and medication. This is especially true for women with disabilities, immigrant women, and racialized women. Women are more likely to work part-time and have less access to workplace benefits. So we need to vote for programs that raise the bar for working people, alleviate financial stress, and make public services more accessible. In 2024, medication costs averaged $1,243 a person for a year. A universal pharmacare program would save money for families at the pharmacy and put that money back in the pockets of people who do not have access to full drug insurance. And access to healthcare is a human right. And this means having access to the medications that we need to be healthy. Dental care is another major expense, and a universal dental care program would help close the gap between those with access and those without. For decades, women advocates have called for $10 a day childcare, and we're finally seeing the fruits of that advocacy, with provinces working with the federal government to create affordable childcare. For too long, many women have been leaving the job market and putting their careers on hold to take care of their children because paying for childcare was not an option. And this is slowly changing, but we need further investments in childcare to make this a reality for families across the country. Increased access to childcare means more women can participate in the labor economy and advance professionally, decreasing the gender wage gap. Our governments need to invest in sectors and raise wages where women predominantly work. This is daycare, community and social services, education and healthcare. Women work in these fields in large numbers and use specialized skills that are undervalued. And the government needs to take action and fairly compensate these workers in these sectors. Because care work is often performed by women and considered unskilled labor. Its contribution to our economy is largely unrecognized. And for those that work in care sectors, such as personal support workers, caregivers, early childhood educators and support workers, are undervalued, and these jobs are often low-waged, precarious, and have poor working conditions. What we need to do is contribute to a cultural shift where care work is valued, visible, and supported. And we use our vote to support political parties that invest in our daycare and our healthcare sectors to lift the wages for all workers and universally expand access to things like medication, daycare, and dental care. And we can decrease the wage gap by supporting public policies that expand women's access to male-dominated industries, such as the building trades. For example, governments can incentivize participation in the sector by providing grants to women and other equity-seeking groups who pursue apprenticeships. In Ontario, these grants exist, but they could be expanded. So when the federal election comes along, we need to be thinking about what policy changes could hurt efforts for fair pay and which policies can strengthen them. So we need to consider legislation as part of our voting mechanism. So here in Ontario, we have two pieces of legislation. In 1988, Ontario Pay Equity Act came into effect. So that's provincially regulated workplaces. In 2018, federal legislation passed for the Pay Equity Act, which deals with the federal workplaces. So both of these are important tools to achieve equity. But if we're not careful, we could lose them or see them weakened. Across the border, we're seeing an assault on policies that benefit women and other equity-seeking groups. Diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are under an unprecedented attack. Donald Trump has signed a slew of executive orders that aim to dismantle these programs. These policies that targeted previous discrimination are being removed. Federal contractors have been directed to stop diversity promotion and affirmative action initiatives, and the private sector has been encouraged to do the same. Other executive orders demand that all programs be terminated across the federal government. And amidst this political shift, many corporations are eliminating their programs entirely. In addition, we are seeing the Trump administration target transgender rights. And like its neighbor to the south, Canada could one day see regression in pay equity initiatives and the laws that promote equality. This would not only widen the gender wage gap, but we would see higher unemployment, and it would affect our prosperity as a nation. So what's happening across the border reminds us how important it is to cast an informed ballot. Excuse me. It's possible we could enter a federal election very soon, and your vote is an important way to have your voice heard. So you need to be informed, read the party platforms, and educate yourself on the issues so that our power as women is felt. And the policies and programs we have today were hard fought for and can be taken away. So be sure to vote and vote for the parties and the politicians that support women's empowerment and equality. So I'll ask, for those that hold leadership or management positions within your organizations, that power gives you the ability to use your influence and support women-friendly policies in the workplace. And we know that employers have an important role to play in decreasing the gender wage gap by creating more inclusive workspaces. Hiring processes are a good place to start. Having strategies that are equitable while benefiting from a wider talent pool that includes women are critical. Including multiple women, racialized, women with disabilities in shortlists for recruitment and promotions will increase the likelihood that a woman will be selected. Including statements welcoming job applications from equity-seeking groups, brings diverse experiences and perspectives to your organization. And when women and other equity-seeking groups participate in hiring committees, inherent biases are reduced in the assessment of women's skills and experiences. So recruit women to your hiring committees. Another thing that you can do is make changes in working conditions so that the work environment is more inclusive for women. For example, workplace flexibility can create a welcoming environment for workers of all genders. These flexible work options can include remote work, job sharing, or scheduling. Increasing paternity and maternity leave benefits and providing additional top-up provides much-needed assistance to parents. As employers, provide encouragement to support all parents who want to take those leaves. These positive changes to working conditions make the workplace more attractive for women applicants, empower women to succeed in their positions, and facilitates career growth. So it goes without saying that for myself personally, strengthening collective bargaining rights and expanding unionization to new workplaces provides a valuable opportunity to decrease the gender wage gap. And unions have a major role to play in achieving pay equity and raising the bar for all workers. This happens in numerous ways. Unions are essential in the enforcement of pay equity laws. And while employers are required by law to comply with the federal and pay equity acts, in both cases, enforcement is compliant-based, and the acts outline compliant mechanisms. Unfortunately, many non-unionized workplaces are non-compliant with the acts, and unions have an important role to play in highlighting the value of these plans in workplaces. Unions help establish collaborative relationships with employers so that workers and employers can work together towards achieving pay equity. And the federal act, unlike Ontario's provincial act, includes mandatory maintenance provisions, which require employers to come back to the table to address equity issues that emerge over time as organizations undergo change. So it is not a one-time fix. And while these pieces of legislation are important tools to address equity, in practice, they require workers to be organized and resourced in order to collaborate effectively with employers around the shared goal of achieving equity. There are more proactive models with stricter enforcement that exist globally. In Iceland, companies with 25 or more employees must prove they have a pay equity plan in place, or they face fines. But our system puts the onus on workers and employers to make it a priority. Unions have historically played a major role in advocating for legislation in Canada, and Ontario and the Federal Act are a result of tireless advocacy efforts by the labor movement. And unions are responsible for many of the pay equity legal challenges launched that have delivered positive outcomes for workers. Because of the union advantage, the wage gap is smaller for unionized women. In 2024, unionized women made an average of 94% of a unionized man's salary, $2.21 less. Non-unionized women made on average of 84% of a non-unionized man's salary, or $6.07 less. While employers at both levels are obligated to be compliant, unions work with employers to ensure workplaces respect the integrity of the Act and meet the legal obligations together. The process of developing these plans is complex and can take years and involves several steps. But doing the planning processes means identifying feminized jobs that are undervalued and coming up with a plan together to bring those jobs in line with compensation of other comparable jobs. And it is no easy task. Unionized workers have the expertise and organizational stability and the resources to carry out the significant work. And furthermore, unionized workers have better protection, especially when it comes to advocacy. Collective agreements enshrine these rights and provide speedy recourse for workers facing retaliation of their work. So when unionized workers come to the table to discuss pay equity, they have power. And when we sit on pay equity committees, we know we sit as equals. So since pay equity legislation was introduced, the labor movement has had significant victories. The largest payout in pay equity was seen in 1999 when the Public Service Alliance of Canada won a 16-year battle against the Federal Treasury Board. 230,000 federal public service workers were awarded retroactive payments totaling $3 billion. And this fight began before there was a Federal Pay Equity Act, beginning with a complaint at the Human Rights Tribunal, which is upheld in federal court. And at the Society, we have seen major victories as a part of unionization. When we first organized Legal Aid Ontario, they did not have a pay equity plan in place. And as part of the bargaining process, that was negotiated at the first round of bargaining. Subsequent to that, when the Chinese and Southeast Asian Legal Clinic joined our union, the first collective agreement negotiated a pay equity plan. And currently, we are in negotiation with the National Judicial Institute, who was organized also in 2016, to develop a pay equity plan. That organization should have been pay equity compliant 35 years ago. But what we find is when we organize new areas, that these plans have never been created. And while unions are essential to the implementation of legislation, they're also critical at raising the worker standard of living and job satisfaction. Create a level playing field by harnessing the collective powers of workers. When workers unionize, they win collective bargaining rights. And through uniting workers, unions can negotiate wage increases that raise the bar for all workers. We negotiate for more sick days, family care leave, bereavement leave, and vacation, so that it's easier for women to juggle their personal responsibilities and the needs of their work. And this is especially valuable for women who perform the majority of care work in their families. Unions make workplaces more hospitable to women and put more money in our pockets. According to 2024 data, non-unionized workers made $2.80 less than unionized workers. This figure jumps to $10.28 for seasonal, temporary, and contract employees. And these figures do not account for differences in pension and benefits if they were monetized. So unions do benefit all workers. So we have looked at where there are opportunities to address the gender wage gap. So let's talk about what individuals can take, so all of you can take to make a difference. So what can you do to move the needle on pay equity? So in 2022, the provincial election, 4.7 million people voted, but there were 6 million that didn't cast a ballot. So did your voice count in the last election? So as women, we are a voting population, and we are the majority, and we have voting power. But sometimes we don't make it to the polls because we already have too much on our plates. And if we are going to make gains for women, we cannot let others speak for us. So when election season comes, investigate those platforms and consider which parties want to invest in women. And investing in women means investing in childcare, education, healthcare, anti-poverty initiatives, and other social services. Governments can rescind services, programs, and laws, but voting is something that no one can take away from us. The suffragettes fought hard for us to win this right to vote, and we can honor their legacy by voting in the next election. You can become an advocate. And it can be difficult for women to do so because we are focused on survival. And caregiving responsibilities often fall on women. And many of us are working to put food on the table and pay the bills. So it's hard to find time to advocate. But you can write your member of parliament or provincial parliament and ask for action on gender equality. Ask for investments in sectors where women work, because women workers demand and deserve fair and equal wages, and call for the creation of universal social programs. If you're able, work with a local advocacy group to find your voice and your power, and have conversations with your friends and neighbors. Through speaking out, we can advance women's rights. Join a union. Not only does a union help close the gender wage gap, but it does lift the salary up of all workers. So the next time you see a picket line in your community, visit that picket line, because those workers are fighting for fairness. Speak out when the government introduces laws legislating workers back to work or capping pay increases. These laws weaken the ability of workers to make gains for women and its broader membership at the bargaining table. Consider joining with your workers to organize a union. The Ontario Federation of Labour can help connect you with a union that operates in your sector and may be able to provide you with support in organizing your workplaces. It takes time and commitment to bring a union to your workplace, but it is the most effective way to create pay equity. So the theme of this year's International Women's Day is to accelerate action. And this means fighting for change in our workplaces, in the public square, and at the ballot box. And if we channel our collective power as women, we will continue to shrink the pay gap, because it's not right that women are paid less. Fair pay is a human right, and fair pay means that more than just money is in your pocket. Income equality can bring us economic freedom, retirement security, and greater personal safety, and respect at work. But we need to work together and vote together to make this a reality.